You reach to the back of your pantry, and your hand lands on a jar you forgot you owned. There is a moment of doubt. You wonder if it is still good, or if you should just throw it out like the label warns. Here is what I learned after years of digging through old kitchens and older books. Some foods never truly expire. Not in months, not in years, and in a few cases, not in your lifetime. The date stamped on them is a business decision, not a scientific fact. This knowledge is not new. It is old, nearly forgotten, kept alive by people who lived through hard times and could not afford to waste a single thing. And by the end of this, I am going to hand you a method that was written down in a document from the year 1869, a preservation trick so simple you already own everything you need for it tonight. I still remember standing in my grandmother's cellar when I was maybe 9 years old, watching her lift a crock of something down from a shelf and tell me it was older than I was. I thought she was joking. She was not. She lived to be 91, and she never once got sick from her own pantry. I spent most of my adult life doing the opposite of what she did. I threw away food the second a printed date told me to. I bought new, I trusted the label, I filled the trash can every single week and never questioned it. I thought that was just how a modern kitchen worked. Then I started paying attention to the foods that sat in the same spot for years and never changed at all. And once I saw the pattern, I could not unsee it. So let me walk you through the 11 foods that outlast almost everything, starting with the one hiding in nearly every kitchen in the country: honey. Real, raw honey never spoils. Not in a year, not in a decade, not in 3,000 years, and I do not say that lightly. In the 1920s, archaeologists working in the tombs of ancient Egypt found sealed pots of honey that were more than 3,000 years old, and that honey was still perfectly edible. Think about that. A food older than most written history, still good enough to eat. The reason is chemistry that our great-grandmothers understood by instinct even if they could not name it. Honey is naturally low in moisture and high in sugar, and that combination makes it nearly impossible for bacteria to survive inside it. On top of that, bees add an enzyme that produces a tiny amount of hydrogen peroxide, the same thing in your medicine cabinet, which quietly guards the honey from spoiling. Now here is what people get wrong. When honey turns cloudy, hard, and grainy in the jar, most folks assume it has gone bad and they toss it. That crystallized honey is not spoiled. It is doing exactly what real honey does. All you have to do is set the jar in a bowl of warm water and let it sit, and it melts right back to gold. I have done this with honey that was pushed to the back of a shelf for 6 years, and it came back like the day I bought it. The only rule is to keep water out of it and keep the lid on. Moisture is the one enemy. Keep it dry and sealed, and that jar will outlive the shelf it sits on. But honey is only the beginning, because the next food on my list is something you probably pour every single day without realizing it is nearly indestructible. White rice. Plain white rice, kept dry, can last 30 years and still cook up just fine. The people who study this for a living have proven it. Researchers connected to Brigham Young University in Utah tested white rice that had been stored for up to 30 years, and they found it remained safe and palatable decades after it was sealed away. Here is the catch, and it matters. This applies to white rice, not brown rice. Brown rice still has its natural oils, and those oils go rancid within a year or so. White rice has been stripped of that oily layer, and that is exactly why it lasts. What looks like a downgrade is actually the reason it survives the decades. The old-timers knew to keep it dry, cool, and away from bugs, and if you do the same, you have an emergency food that costs almost nothing. A large bag of white rice is one of the cheapest calorie sources on earth, and it will sit patiently for a generation waiting for you to need it. I keep mine in a sealed container with the air pressed out, tucked in a cool cabinet, and I stopped buying the tiny expensive boxes years ago. Now, why did we ever start believing rice goes bad? Why does the bag have a date at all? Hold that question, because the answer touches every food on this list, and I am going to show you exactly who benefits from you believing it. But first, let me take you to the pantry staple that turns any dish into a preserved one. Salt. Plain salt never expires, and it never will, because salt is not really alive in the way other foods are. It is a mineral pulled from the sea or the earth, and minerals do not rot. This is the same substance that entire empires were built on. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt, and the very word salary comes from that practice, from the Latin word for salt. For thousands of years, salt was how humanity kept food alive through winter. Before there was a single refrigerator anywhere on the planet, there was salt, and salt was enough. It pulls the moisture out of meat and fish, and without moisture, the bacteria that cause rot simply cannot live. That is the whole secret behind salted cod, cured ham, and every barrel of preserved meat that carried families through the cold months. The only thing to watch with salt is that it can clump if it gets damp, but clumping is not spoiling. Break it up and it works exactly the same. If you buy plain salt, not the kind with added iodine or anti-caking agents, you have a preservative and a seasoning that will never let you down, no matter how many decades pass. I have a box in my cupboard I bought so long ago I cannot remember the year, and it seasons my food the same as the day it came home. And salt leads me straight to its partner, because there is another sweetener sitting near your honey that follows the very same rule. Sugar. White sugar, brown sugar, powdered sugar, kept dry, lasts indefinitely. Like salt, sugar works by controlling moisture. In high concentrations, sugar pulls water away from any microbe that tries to grow and starves it before it can take hold. That is why jams and jellies loaded with sugar can sit on a shelf for ages, and why our ancestors preserved fruit in syrup long before canning was common. The trouble people run into is that sugar turns rock hard, and they think that means it is finished. A hardened brick of brown sugar is not spoiled at all. Put a slice of bread or a damp paper towel in the container overnight, and by morning it softens right back up. I have rescued more hard sugar this way than I can count, and it never cost me a cent. Keep sugar sealed and away from moisture and away from strong smells, since it can absorb odors, and it will outlast almost everything else in your kitchen. So now you have honey, rice, salt, and sugar, 4 foods that laugh at expiration dates. But you might be wondering why every one of them still carries a date on the label if none of them can actually go bad. That question is where this story stops being about food and starts being about something else entirely. Here's the truth I stumbled into, and it made me angry once I understood it. For most foods, that printed date is not a safety warning at all. In the United States, except for infant formula, federal law does not even require those dates, and they are not a measure of when food becomes unsafe. They are the manufacturer's guess about peak freshness, nothing more. The Food and Drug Administration itself has said that confusion over these dates is a major reason Americans throw away enormous amounts of perfectly good food, and the numbers are staggering. Studies estimate that families toss out billions of pounds of edible food every year, in large part because a date told them to, not because anything was actually wrong with it. Think about who wins when you believe that. Every time you throw away a good jar and buy a new one, someone sells another jar. The date on the package trains you to replace what never needed replacing. It is not a conspiracy whispered in a back room. It is simpler and quieter than that. It is a habit built into the packaging, and it profits from your doubt. Our grandparents did not have those dates, and they did not need them. They used their eyes, their nose, and their common sense. They knew that food tells you when it has gone bad. It smells wrong. It looks wrong. It grows something fuzzy. Absent those signs, the food is food. Somewhere along the way, we traded that confidence for a printed number, and we have been paying for that trade ever since. Now let me show you the next food that proves the point, because this one sounds like it should spoil in a heartbeat, and it does not. Dried beans, a bag of dried beans, kept dry and cool, can last 30 years or more and still nourish you. They may take a little longer to cook as they age, and they may need a longer soak, but they remain safe and full of protein and fiber for decades. Pair a bag of beans with a bag of rice, both of which store for a generation, and you have a complete protein that has fed humanity for thousands of years for pennies a serving. This is exactly the kind of pairing that carried families through the Great Depression, when nothing could be wasted and every dry good was treated like treasure. People stored beans in glass jars, in tins, in anything that kept the bugs and the moisture out, and those beans waited faithfully until they were needed. There is a reason beans show up in nearly every old survival pantry I have ever read about. The trick with old beans is patience. Soak them overnight, or even longer for the truly ancient ones, and cook them low and slow. A pinch of baking soda in the soaking water can help soften beans that have hardened with age. That is a trick straight out of the old kitchen manuals, and it works. Now, beans are dry, and it makes sense they would last, but the next item is a liquid, and the fact that it never spoils surprises almost everyone. I tell vinegar. White vinegar is essentially self-preserving, and it lasts indefinitely. The very acidity that makes vinegar what it is also makes it a hostile place for any spoilage organism to grow. Nothing harmful wants to live in it. This is why vinegar has been a preservation tool for thousands of years, used to pickle everything from cucumbers to eggs, holding food safe on shelves through long winters. You might notice some cloudiness or little strands forming in an old bottle of vinegar, especially in the cider kinds. That is harmless. It is often just a natural formation of the vinegar itself, and it does not mean the vinegar has gone bad. You can use it for cooking, for cleaning, for pickling, all the same as before. And this is where a single bottle starts to replace a whole shelf of products. Vinegar cleans your windows, cuts grease, softens laundry, and preserves your garden harvest, and it never expires while it does all of it. My grandmother had one big jug of it that seemed to solve every problem in the house, and I understand now why she never bought the fancy sprays. But vinegar is a liquid you might expect to be tough. The next food is delicate, or so I thought, until I learned the truth about how long it really keeps. Hard liquor and pure spirits. An unopened bottle of distilled spirits, your whiskey, your vodka, your rum, does not spoil and can last for decades. The alcohol content is high enough that nothing can grow in it, and as long as the bottle stays sealed and out of direct sunlight and heat, the contents remain stable for a very long time. Distillers have understood this since the craft began centuries ago, which is why old bottles are prized rather than feared. Before I show you exactly how that system works against your wallet, I want to mention something that helped me put all of this together in one place. I wrote a book called Smart Basics that walks through the full picture of food, frugality, and the quiet systems that quietly cost most households far more than they realize. You can find it linked in the description below. If any part of what we have covered so far has made you want to go deeper, that book is where the whole framework lives. Now, back to the pantry. Because every time you throw away a good jar and buy a new one, someone sells another jar. Even the flavor holds remarkably well in sealed distilled spirits, unlike wine or beer, which are alive with yeast and change quickly. This is the difference between something fermented and something distilled. Distillation concentrates the alcohol to a point where time simply loses its grip. Keep the bottle upright so the strong alcohol does not eat away at the cap. Store it somewhere cool and dark, and it will wait for the occasion. I am not telling you to stock a bar. I am telling you that the principle behind these spirits, high alcohol driving out all life, is one more example of how our ancestors used natural chemistry to defeat time. Now we are 7 foods deep, and every one of them has been sitting in ordinary homes for generations. But I promised you a method you could use tonight with what you already own. And this is the part I most want you to hear, because it is for anyone who thinks preserving food means special jars, special machines, or money you would rather keep. Here is the good news. You do not need any of that. Some of the most reliable preservation on earth happens with nothing but a cool, dark, dry corner and a container you already have. Let me give you the food that proves it. Dried pasta, plain dried pasta, made from just flour and water with no eggs, can last 30 years or more when kept dry. It has almost no moisture in it to begin with, and moisture is what spoilage needs. Seal it away from air and humidity, keep the bugs out, and a box of pasta becomes a decades-long insurance policy that costs about $1. You do not need a vacuum machine to do this. Take a clean glass jar with a tight lid, one you might have tossed in the recycling, and pour your dry goods in. Fill it up so there is little air. Close it tight, and store it in the back of a cool cabinet, away from the stove and away from any window. That is it. That is the whole method. People spent good money on gadgets to do what a washed pasta sauce jar does for free, and if you want to go one step further with what is already in your house, here is an old trick. A couple of bay leaves tucked into the container of rice, beans, flour, or pasta helps keep the pantry moths and weevils away because those insects dislike the scent. Our grandmothers did this without thinking twice. No chemicals, no special product, just a leaf you can buy in a jar for $1, protecting 30 years of food. The point is this. The industry wants you to believe preservation is complicated and requires their equipment. It never did. A dry jar, a dark shelf, and a bay leaf carried entire families through the hardest years this country ever saw. You already have what you need to start tonight. So let me give you 3 more foods to fill those jars, starting with one you sprinkle on your food and never think about: cornstarch. Pure cornstarch, kept dry, lasts indefinitely. Like salt and sugar, it is a stable, dry substance with no fat and no moisture to turn on it. As long as it stays sealed away from humidity, it will thicken your gravy and your pie filling decades from now, exactly the way it does today. The same goes for baking soda, which not only lasts a remarkably long time, but also cleans your sink, freshens your fridge, and soothes an upset stomach, all from one cheap box. These are the quiet workhorses of a lasting pantry. They do not look impressive. They do not come with fancy promises. But they sit there, stable and ready, year after year, asking nothing of you but a dry place to rest. I have a container of cornstarch that has moved houses with me twice, and it still thickens a sauce like the first day. And that brings me to the 10th food, one that sounds impossible to keep, but that our ancestors relied on completely through every winter: powdered milk and the broader family of dried dairy. Properly stored non-fat powdered milk can last for many years, and some emergency-grade dried milk is rated for 20 years or more. By removing the water and the fat, you remove almost everything that lets milk spoil. What remains is a shelf-stable powder that returns to something like milk the moment you add water back to it. This was a lifeline in wartime, when fresh milk could not travel and families still needed nourishment for their children. Dried milk crossed oceans and sat in cupboards and never quit. Keep it cool, keep it dry, keep it sealed away from light, and it holds its nutrition far longer than anyone expects from something as fragile seeming as milk. It is the same principle as everything else on this list. Take away the moisture, and you take away time's power to ruin it. Now, before I give you the 11th food and then the finale I have been saving, let me name the thing plainly, because we are past the point of politeness. The reason you were never taught any of this is not that the knowledge was lost by accident. It is that a kitchen full of confident, self-reliant people who trust their own senses is a kitchen that buys less. Doubt sells. A printed date that makes you replace a good jar every few months moves far more product than a grandmother's steady certainty ever could. For most of human history, wasting food could mean starving, so people became experts at making food last. Then, in a single generation, we handed that expertise over to a label and a marketing department, and we forgot the skills that kept our families alive for thousands of years. That is the real cost. Not just the money in your trash can, though that adds up to hundreds of dollars a year for the average family. The real cost is the confidence we gave away. So let me give you back one more food. And then the oldest secret of all. The 11th food is one you might have written off completely, and that mistake is costing homes across the country real money. Canned foods, commercially canned goods, kept in a cool and stable place, remain safe far, far beyond the date printed on the lid. The date is about peak quality, the color and the texture at their best, not about safety. The United States Department of Agriculture has stated that canned foods stay safe as long as the can itself stays in good condition, and there are documented cases of properly stored canned food remaining safe to eat many years past its date. The rule here is simple, and it is about the can, not the calendar. If the can is not bulging, not leaking, not badly rusted or dented along a seam, and it opens with the normal little hiss or sigh of a good seal, the food inside is almost certainly fine. A bulging can is the one warning you never ignore, because that can signal gas from dangerous bacteria, and that one goes in the trash without a taste. But a plain, sound can from 3 years ago, that is dinner, not garbage. I used to clear out my pantry every year and throw away cans that were a few months past their date. Dozens of dollars of good food straight into the bin because a number told me to. I do not do that anymore. I check the can, I trust my senses, and I have saved a small fortune while eating perfectly well. That single change in how I read a pantry paid me back more than any coupon ever did. So there they are, 11 foods that outlast the dates, the doubts, and the marketing. But I promised you something more at the very start. I promised you a method written down in a document from the year 1869, a way of preserving food so simple that you already own every single thing it requires. This is the piece almost no one talks about anymore, and once you know it, you will never look at a bowl of fat the same way again. The method is called potting, and the sealing technique at its heart appears in Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, a British home manual whose expanded edition landed in 1869 and which sat in kitchens for generations as the final word on running a home. Long before refrigerators, cooks preserved meat by cooking it, packing it tightly into a small pot, and then sealing the top with a layer of pure fat, clarified butter or lard, poured over the surface until it hardened into a solid lid. Here is why it works, and it is beautiful in its simplicity. The layer of fat forms an airtight seal over the food. No air reaches the meat, and without air, the bacteria that cause spoilage cannot do their work. The food underneath sits protected in its own little sealed vault, and it keeps for weeks, even months, in a cool larder, with no electricity, no canning equipment, no special jars, just meat and fat and a cool, dark corner. This is the same principle behind the French confit that fine restaurants still charge you good money for. Duck cooked slowly in its own fat, then stored submerged in that fat, sealed away from the air. It is not a luxury invention. It is peasant preservation, a way poor families kept precious meat from going to waste, dressed up centuries later and sold back to us as fine dining. And you can do a humble version this weekend with what is already in your kitchen. Cook your meat thoroughly, chicken, pork, whatever you have, pack it tightly into a clean small jar or crock, pressing out the air pockets. Then pour a layer of melted fat over the top, enough to cover the meat completely, and let it cool until the fat sets into a firm white seal. Keep it cold, and check that the fat cap stays unbroken. As long as that seal holds and the food stays cool, you have preserved a meal the exact way households did more than 150 years ago. Now, I want you to be sensible, because I am your neighbor here, not a reckless voice. Use your senses every time. Keep it cold. And if anything ever smells or looks wrong, you let it go. Our ancestors respected this method precisely because they respected the food. But the fact that it exists at all, that a pot of meat sealed under fat could carry a family through lean weeks with nothing but a cool cellar, tells you everything about how much we have forgotten and how little we actually need. That is the inheritance. The knowledge existed for centuries. It was written down carefully in books like Mrs. Beeton's so it would not be lost. Then convenience arrived, and we set it aside, and a whole generation grew up believing food is fragile and dates are law, and the only safe pantry is a freshly bought one. But the knowledge never actually died. It waited in old books and old cellars and the memory of grandmothers for someone to pick it back up, and now you are holding it. You just recovered something that was quietly taken from you, one jar and one date at a time. You are the kind of person who would rather know a thing than keep paying for it, or you would have clicked away long ago. That instinct, that refusal to be told what to throw away, is exactly what kept our great-grandparents fed through wars and depressions and winters we can barely imagine. So let me ask you one thing, and I truly want your answer. Of these 11 foods, which one has been sitting in your pantry right now, past its date, that you are about to throw out before you watch this? Tell me in the comments. And if your grandmother had a preservation trick of her own, the kind that never made it into any book, leave it below so the rest of us can learn it, because that is how this knowledge survives. If any part of this made you look at your kitchen differently, then you belong with the people who are quietly reclaiming all of this, the skills and the confidence that convenience culture talked us out of. Consider subscribing, not to support me, but to stand with everyone who refuses to keep buying what they could simply know. Because next time, I am going to show you the everyday item you keep in your refrigerator that actually lasts far longer at room temperature, and how storing it cold has been quietly ruining it all along. Your grandmother knew. Now, so do you. Do not let it be forgotten again. Before you go, let me tell you what waits just past this video. That preservation trick, inside my membership, I walk you through the whole method, step by step, so you can do it tonight. It's called the Old Ways Almanac. In there, you can ask me your own pantry questions, and a real person answers. Never a machine. Folks just like you are already in there with me. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen. Cancel anytime, no risk. Come join me. If storing food this way was helpful to you, please subscribe and stay with me. I have many more videos right here to help you prepare your pantry, one simple step at a time.